In Creatures of Sonaria, plushies are items that can change your gameplay drastically. Some might give powerful boosts like extra ailments and boosted stats, while some can just change your appearance of your creature. And today, we're ranking all of them, which to put in perspective, there is a lot to get through. Around 84 in total. So to save your sanity, and mine, we won't include any of these guys, as they only affect nesting or are just intended for cosmetic purposes only. Anyway, without further ado, let's rank these dang plushies, shall we? Starting off in F tier, we have the Serpent plushie. Although its appearance looks powerful, it really is just the other way around. Sure, it gives you faster turn speed, but for the drawback of 10% less damage, it is an absurd price. Although a golden rule in COS is to use 2 plushies at all times, Serpent on the other hand is the opposite. You almost don't want to use it because, well, it's really just nerfing you. Maybe if it was something like 2.5% or even 5% less damage, I would actually consider using it. But for now, I believe this deserves the title of the worst plushie in the game. And it's not even close. In number 66, we have the Seal plushie. Now, although it does allow aquatics and semi-aquatics to stay on land for a little longer, it ultimately is just a waste of a plushie slot. Although you can be hurt by being on land for too long, your health is capped at 50%, which still is enough, depending on the species, to give you the ability to just, well, fight back, should you have to. It's not detrimental like Serpent, which is why it's not like Blast, but if Serpent ever got buffed, I would probably replace Seal for its position, hence why it's in the 66th spot. In the 65th spot, we have Owl plushie. There is not really much to say about this guy, other than the fact it's, well, useless. The only time I would really ever consider using it is if night vision just ever got a rework. Otherwise, I would just never really consider using it. Enough said. In the 64th and 63rd spot, we have Uvatops and Aerodon, which both lower hunger and thirst by 15%. Like Owl plushie, you really do not have a good usage for this, unless for some really odd reason you're struggling to find food or water, which, to be honest, with these bots taking all the food, I wouldn't be surprised if that even happened. But otherwise, you really don't have a valid reason to just use this. Next up, we have Spring Ram. You could argue that it shouldn't even be on this list, however, this one might actually have a use as it adds a 1.5 times multiplier to SAT, which automatically makes it better than Uvatops. However, again, it's not really useful beside the fact it allows you to just grow slightly faster with SAT available. However, in hindsight, I'd still say it's just better than Uvatops purely for the fact it, well, simply is better. I know I'm just yapping at this point, but like, seriously, what do you expect me to say about this guy? Coming up in 61st and 60th, we have Maple Leaflet and Ghost plushie. I put both of these together as really both of them don't serve as much purpose as one another. Now, if there were a reason to use these guys in the future, I would definitely place them in at least E tier. However, adding a slight resistance to injury and bleed at a pretty inconvenient percentage makes them pretty weird to use in general. My reason being is that you kind of need to run 2 of them in order to actually get the maximum value, and for the cost of both your plushie slots, it's simply just not worth it. Next up, we have Palm Tree. Palm Tree was supposed to be higher up on this list. However, I realized that by doing some testing, Reflux actually just takes 25% of your max hunger, and not by a specific amount. So therefore, Palm Tree is actually useless, as Reflux is just not affected by Palm Tree. Like, seriously. That was the only usage I could think of in terms of PvP. Outside of PvP, it could be useful for completing regional missions, as one of them makes you have to eat a certain amount, but still, the fact that it's the only usage proves my point that it does deserve F tier. Following this up, we have Arcane. This is basically the same reason as Goldfish, however, the reason why I place this higher is because more creatures with high damage dealing breaths can actually benefit from Arcane more than creatures using Goldfish. If that makes any sense, I don't know if that makes sense either. There isn't really much else to say about this, apart from the fact that there are much better options to choose from in terms of plushies, which is why I believe that Arcane's capped at F tier. In 57th, we have Sky Plushie, and unfortunately, it falls under the same fate as Serpent. For a slight speed bonus while flying, you lose 10% of your weight, which again is a pretty bad trade-off. There are probably some ankle biters that would benefit from using this, although that small portion would likely want to use something else like Pig Lantern or Cat Plushie. But despite that, there really isn't any real value I can see using this guy. However, that might change in the future. Who knows? In 56, ironically, we have Lance Plushie. Now I could put this guy in E tier as having twice as much of a duration for rolling in mud sounds good on paper. However, there is only one reason why people would use it, and it's for in case they forget to do so. At the very least, I can see it being useful with Ocean Wing, which buffs the effect of mud rolling, hence both complementing each other. However, on its own, it's very dependent, and realistically, if you're going for a full mud build, you're almost better off replacing it with Heart Plushie instead. And in the last spot, being at the top of F tier, we have Humming Frost. I could genuinely put this in the bottom of F tier, where it belongs, as for 300k mush, you're essentially getting a plushie that's purpose is to be less convenient at a higher price. Or as I put it, we have Sonic Wings at home, which if you don't know what Sonic Wings does, it's an ability that removes the stamina cost for, you guessed it, hovering. However, the only reason that I would even consider putting this at the top of F tier is that with it, you also get a mug in real life that you can actually use in public without getting secondhand embarrassment, so long as you are willing to pay the international shipping costs, because for me, yeah, I'm not buying that. Now, kicking off E tier, we have Jotun Scale. For starters, I am not spending 300k just to take less damage while grabbed, but in some very niche scenarios, I can at least see it being useful. 15% less damage is quite a lot if you consider that 90% of the time the person who grabbed you would be dealing more damage than you. But still, it definitely still deserves E tier, because at the very least I can see it allowing you to take one more hit than usual, and that one hit could be the difference between you winning or losing a fight. In 53rd, we have Goldfish. Now, having the ability to eat anything without consequences does seem pretty useless at first. However, I can see it being somewhat of a good use. For example, Golbini, you know that like little piranha creature? It has both Reflux and Gourmandizer, which both utilize the hunger mechanic for its gameplay. Having the ability to access more food around you at least lets you be more consistent within fights. However, aside from that, not many other creatures seem to benefit from this plushie, which is why it's so low down on this list. If there were more creatures that benefited from this plushie, I'd easily consider putting this in D or even C tier. However, for now, it deserves to stay in E tier. Now, in my 2 years of my time playing COS, would I ever thought I would be talking about C plushie? However, here we are. Now, 10% faster walking does seem pretty bad on paper. However, in a few scenarios, you can technically use it to make your creature almost faster walking than running. However, those that it does work on are pretty much all tier 5s and super behemoths, which are usually all pretty slow to begin with. Although it's a cool concept, I think most creatures would prefer to run better options for tier 5s, such as for example Void or Pig Lantern. Darkstar is quite a unique plushie that I think can come in clutch in its niche moments. However, going from 5 stacks per tick to 4 stacks in terms of ailments usually aren't very substantial. The only time I would consider this quote unquote useful is if you need to get rid of heal preventing ailments quickly like burn and bleed, and you also don't have a healer near you. Other than that, it's pretty underwhelming to say the least, especially since it's marked as a legendary item. If you are an Eggy Snake user, you use it for one reason only, to be the most insufferably annoying person in the server. I mean, hey, at least there is a usage for this plushie, unlike 25% of the plushies in the game, but besides that, in PvP purposes, it's practically useless. Unless you use it in a way to make yourself a target, then maybe, just maybe, you can use it for your advantage. Snowman has a pretty interesting concept where once equipped, your age bar basically freezes. This on paper could be useful as younger slots actually move a lot faster than usual, but the usage in terms of PvP is barely visible. I mean, maybe someone will make some disgusting speed build with this plushie, but until that day, this plushie is just going to continue gaining dust in my inventory. To be completely honest, I never even knew that this plushie ever existed until I began making this video. But for invis users, this plushie is actually pretty decent. When equipped, it makes your footsteps almost impossible to hear. Keyword almost. The effectiveness of this plushie, I feel, purely depends on whether the person you are sneaking up on has ears or not. If they do, then, well, you're screwed. But regardless, this could be a half-decent plushie to use for an invis build. When picking a plushie to use for tank builds, I would not consider Heartsnake as my first or even second choice. On the flip side, I could see it being sort of powerful in countering aggressive players, but most decent players though would realize that you have this plushie on and adapt to it pretty quickly. But against overconfident ankle biters, this could actually catch them off guard. Still though, I feel that using a plushie like Cavity Critter or Ember Spirit would be a better pick, depending on the species that you are using. Jammy Slug, although it's my favorite design in terms of plushies, also falls in the same category of Heartsnake, only this time it shuts off abilities instead of draining stamina. I feel that this one is a bit better as it means that ankle biters are forced to use their abilities early in order to get value out of them, hence making them more vulnerable to being punished. It's only 0.5 defensive necropoison however, so like Heartsnake it can be easily recovered from, but still, I think it's purely better just for it being slightly more versatile. Now, although Frost Dragon does seem a little underwhelming, it is technically a counter to Tannenbaum which inflicts Frostbite. Still, I wouldn't recommend using it as a considerable choice for a creature, with the only exception is if they are weaker to Frostbite like Cantapodi for example, or can reach full Frostbite immunity with it like Guyo and Flameray. Regardless, there are also some downsides to this plushie. Firstly, there aren't many creatures that mainly deal Frostbite, with a few exceptions being creatures like Silver Squall and Umbraxi. Yes, Umbraxi deals Frostbite, I didn't know that either. But secondly, Frostbite in general isn't a very common ailment that is used as a win con. But still, overall, it's pretty bad, but not bad enough to be unusable like other plushies. In 44th, we have Minty Wiggler. Now, it almost made it out of E tier, somehow. But the reason why I put it this high is its power in one weather condition. Basically, Minty Wiggler gives the ability Frosty, which according to the wiki gives immunity to blizzards, which basically prevents stamina regen. With this in mind, you can scoop up easy kills during this time, as while others won't be able to move quickly, you can, and in addition to this, if it's winter or famine, you also can regen stamina a lot faster. However, this only is usable around 25% of the time in servers, which means in the other 75%, this plushie is basically useless. Hence why it doesn't quite make D tier. At the peak of E tier, we have Baby Dragon. For breath spammers, this plushie is a must-have. However, outside that, it's still very weak. Ever since it got nerfed sometime around a year ago, it has basically lacked in its usage. It makes sense why it got nerfed from 30% to 20%, as it made it so breath spamming was way more punishing and less of a liability. That was until breath spamming was basically removed. But now, due to its weak effect, the only creature I can think of that will benefit from this is Lucentia, as its breath does ground other flyers pretty efficiently. Novas and other creatures with Cloud Breath could also benefit too, but since breath spamming has been removed, its effect is a lot less efficient than what it was previously able to do. In bottom of D tier, we have Icebreaker. Its 1.25 times multiplier for knockback is, in my opinion, okay, to say the least. I will say though that flinging people to Venezuela with this plushie on has got to be one of the most satisfying and funny ways to troll people in game. In PvP standards though, it's kind of lackluster. Sure, it could work as a way to deter ankle biters and other foes that are dangerous towards you, but again, it's probably better to run something like Knight or a creature with sticky fur. I must say though, to people who do launch people to Venezuela on a regular basis, you deserve a Nobel Peace Prize. Genuinely. Ginger Snapper is basically the Frostbite version of Jammy Slug and Heart Snake. Now the reason why I put this higher than the rest is I believe it does have some good usage. Now the reason why I put this higher than the rest is I believe it does have some good usage. Being able to slow down your foe's attack speed is pretty useful. However, I think there are better plushies to use over Ginger Snapper. Unfortunately, since it's Frostbite, it does take more attacks than usual for it to actually take effect, hence the reason it's in D tier. But if it does get to that stage, it probably can buy you some time to reset. Vampire Bat is practically the exact opposite of Cat Plushie. Instead of people you hit getting bleed, people hitting you will get bleed instead. You probably have noticed a pattern that all of the plushies that give defensive ailments are all capped at D tier. The reason being is that because I believe that having plushies like Cat and Big Lantern are genuinely better and more versatile choices. The only reason I think you would consider choosing Vampire Bat and Ember Spirit, etc. over Cat and Haunt Dragon is if you're playing a tanky build or creature like Kolgroth or Militara. In 39th, we have Stick Plushie. I mean, it's okay. That's all I have to say about it. 10% more stam without drawbacks is pretty good on its own, as it gives creatures who have ambush or dart just that little bit more mobility, which in some scenarios can be game changing. However, Partridge is quite literally just a much better version of this, which just doesn't give you a reason to use Stick at all. If you don't have Partridge however, Stick is still a decent alternative overall. In 38th, and unofficially the best of D tier, Ember Spirit. Like Vamp Bat and Heart Snake, it also gives a defensive ailment. However, Burn is pretty unique compared to other abilities. Firstly, it reduces stamina by 20%, which is pretty nice. However, for each stack of Burn, it also reduces health regen by 10%. And once it reaches 10 stacks, it completely disables health regen like Bleed. For a tanky creature, having defensive burn is better than bleed or poison personally, because not only does it force foes to spend more time to reset, it also reduces your stamina usage, which means if you're going against something that can jump, it limits the amount of times they can use it, hence limiting the amount of times they can readjust their position in their favor. Yes, that was a lot to say in one sentence. Plus, it only takes up one slot, so for tanks this is a semi-good plushie. However, this is only D tier, which means there are flaws with this. For defensive ailments, sure it's nice to have it on creatures that play aggressive, as it can help in certain scenarios, but if you're playing with the intent to face tank people, having plushies that stack when you attack someone is a lot better, as 9 times out of 10 you would be able to apply burn, poison or whatever faster and much earlier on in the fight, especially if you intend to attack first. Hence why all plushies that give defensive ailments are no higher than D tier, simply because having offensive ailments just feels more versatile and more effective. At least that's my opinion. In 37th, we have Fox. Now being at the bottom of C tier can be pretty controversial, but I think it just about belongs here. But gosh, that face makes me want to put in D tier, like, ugh, it's just so ugly. Well, I mean, at least it's still useful. Having an extra burrow can be pretty good in a lot of situations, especially if you're losing the burrow war and need to retreat directly. Plus, while you are in a burrow, you get a nice 5% health regen boost, as well as faster rates for healing debuffs. Personally, for burrowers, this plushie is actually pretty good. It's pretty powerful for playing passive with, and stacking it with other regen boosts can make you unstoppable with the ability to reset really quickly. Unfortunately, however, it isn't stackable, for obvious reasons. but one extra borrow by itself is already good enough to give someone a reason to use this thing. In 36th, we have Bunny. Now, originally I was going to put this higher up in C tier, however, after reading what it does twice, I quite literally had to change the list, as it really isn't as good as I anticipated it to be. However, it still is decent for the purpose it serves. Being 7.5% faster does sound a little underwhelming, but I think if you stack it with other movement speed plushies like Chick, it can actually come in good use. However, still, it only applies when Ambush is active, hence why I moved it down on this list. In 35th, we have Magicorn Prongbug. This basically is just a weaker version of Heart Plushie. Enough said. However, with how easy and cheap it is to get, it easily gives someone who's just started playing a reason to use this guy. Now 10% extra regen might not sound that influential, but compared to all of the other plushies you can get as a beginner, this one is a lot better than the rest. Plus, unlike a lot of top tier plushies, this one actually does not have any drawback. And as a cherry on top, it's also stackable, meaning that you can add 2 of these together to get an amazing 20% health regen boost, with again, no drawbacks. Congrats, you made it through halfway through the tier list. Before I move on to number 34, apparently 95% of you aren't even subscribed to my channel. So if you want to support the channel, make sure to hit that like and subscribe button. Seriously, these videos take ages to make, and all of your support is greatly appreciated. And also, join my Discord server. It's free, and it's a pretty cool place to hang out. Link in description. Anyway, coming in at number 34, we have Rosevine. For creatures with Healing Hunter, this is a must-have, as it basically boosts your healing amount by 10%. However, since it's not stackable, I can't fathom putting it higher than C tier. It's good for healers, as really it's the only way without traits or grinding to actually upgrade Healing Hunter directly. It's good, but again, I do wish it was stackable. Ocean Wing is up next, and honestly, this is kind of an underrated plushie. When you have rolled in mud, instead of getting a regular 25% health regen boost, you get 37.5. Furthermore, this is stackable, so with 2 equips, you can reach a 50% health boost by just rolling in mud. A 50% health boost in general is insane, especially when equipped on a creature like Vahiax, who has an insane base health recovery percent, or something with a quick recovery ability like Archalium. For no drawbacks, this plushie is actually pretty good, especially since, like Magicorn, you can obtain it for like less than 1,000 mush. In 32nd and 31st, we have Succulent and Milo. These basically do the same thing, except that Milo is just a microtransaction version that gives you a material when equipped. Besides that, a 2.5% speed boost is pretty decent for any creature, especially if you're planning to make a PvP relevant speed build. There are better plushies to use, but assuming you only want to spend around 1 to 2k getting Succulent over having to spend Robux on Milo, it's still a pretty neat effect to have anyway, even if it doesn't affect you as much. Now, Night Plushie is by no means bad. For its usage, I actually think is pretty good. The one flaw that brings it down so much though is the fact it's a 1 in 4 chance to happen, which if you know basic probability, that isn't very common. I would probably see more usage on it with tier 5s like Golgoroth, as it can tank more hits, hence giving Night more value. But at the very least, it can counter big damage dealers like Fabrashi or Guio 25% of the time. If I had to describe this plushie in a few words, it would be Reflect with a dice. I could shorten it to 3, but YouTube might hunt me down if I say it. In 29th, we have Eclipse. Basically a much better Ice Wolf, that is, if you're the alpha, the leader, the one to trust. If you haven't got the memo, this plushie only works at night, which is about 50% of the time. The boosts you do get from it are really good, with it basically having the effect of 3 plushies in one. However, the fact that it doesn't work a large majority of the time makes it a lot worse than it looks. Sure, in the right scenarios, you can get some insane value off of Eclipse, especially in Blood Moons. But in the wide majority of them, you're better off running Void and Ice Wolf, as they are active at all times. Yep, you saw it coming. We're talking about tanks again. Only in this case, I'm actually going to say that Cavity Critter's actually pretty good. Having the ability to knock back small tiers without hitting them is really handy, especially against ankle biters who know how to abuse hitboxes. However, I feel that in order to use this plushie, you do need to be skillful and actually be quick enough to punish players from Cavity Critter, although I can see this having a lot of potential for an off-meta build. However, what to pair it with is the true question of this plushie. Until then, I can't really defend putting Cavity Critter anywhere higher than top of C tier. In 27th, we have Swan, and to be honest, trading off some stam regen for Agile Swimmer is in my opinion a pretty decent trade-off. As long as you have ambush on a creature, you can pretty much swim over any body of water as a lanked creature, which not only saves a ton of time by taking huge shortcuts with the help of Agile, it can also help you create and close distance against other land creatures, which can decide whether or not you manage to get the kill. This could easily be a B tier plushie, however, due to its trade-off and it only being usable on creatures without Agile or Ambush, it remains in high C tier for those purposes. Nearly breaking into top 25, we have Reindeer. Having extra glide regen as well as a slight boost to flight speed for no cost makes this pretty versatile for most flyers, especially on creatures with no stamina like Silver Squall or a creature with no glide regen like Muster Garrix. Plus, both of these creatures I just mentioned are pretty slow, so having a slight boost to their flight speed is just a cherry on top. Arguably, I could see this going into the bottom of B tier if the meta begins revolving around slow high tier flyers. However, at top of C tier is still a solid pick for people who like to play flyers. And finally, to conclude C tier, we have Astral Quetzal. Now, this plushie used to be one of the best in the game, however, a few months from now, it received a huge nerf. Now, it gives 25% less health regen and makes you 5% slower. Still, having the ability to be immune to bleed is a crazy thing to have. However, with the nerf it received, it does come with a hefty price. If your creature already has a bad regen speed and is pretty slow, then fair enough, just use this plushie. But for most creatures, it's high risk, high reward. Use this plushie at your own risk. Now, kicking off B tier, we have Jackrabbit. And at a first glance, this plushie is actually pretty underrated. If you pair this with Dolt, you can make a build where jumping basically costs half as much stamina as usual. The only thing that holds this guy back is that only around 40% of creatures can jump, but that still doesn't mean it's a bad plushie. For most creatures, jumping actually costs a lot of stamina to use. Hybok Torok, for example, can only jump 4 times consecutively without modifiers. However, with Jackrabbit, it allows it to jump up to 6 times, which is huge, thus justifying my reason for placing Jackrabbit this high on this tier list. Another plushie that I think is underrated is Springbok, which if you didn't know gives the Will to Live ability to any creature. Will to Live in its description does not seem that good, since you have to sacrifice half your health for the ability to infinitely run. However, there are a few niche uses I can see this having on Wardens. As both of their signature abilities, Warden's Rage and Resistance, are mostly active at 50% health, you can pair this with Springbok to also have unlimited sprint, which for all of these Wardens can be extremely powerful. In number 22, we have Cole. To be honest, I do not really have anything to say about this. It's a nice plushie to have if you don't want to lose 5% of your base damage from a Cow plushie, but at the same time, Cow does feel better to run as a 10% boost to weight hypothetically counteracts its downside. Furthermore, unlike a 3.5% increase, a 10% increase is enough for a creature to grab mirrors and other creatures around its size range. Cole, I believe, would be only good in the niche scenario that you end up facing a mirror, but still, regardless, Cole is just a good plushie. There's good reasons to run it, but Cow is inevitably just better. In number 21, we have Sparkler. Honestly, a lot of people do overlook this thing way too often in my opinion, when realistically, it has potential to be good, if not better, than pre-nerfed Astral. Not only can it be used on a wider variety of creatures since it covers burn, poison, and frostbite, its drawback of only being 20% less resistant to bleed isn't really that bad in hindsight. Sure, being more vulnerable to the most common ailment in the game is a bad thing. However, the trade-off of being fully immune to 3 slightly rarer ones is usually always worth a trade, depending on the species of course. Breaking into the top 20, we have Partridge. Remember how we talked about how Stick was a bad plushie and all? Well, this is why. First off, 20% more stamina is a lot. In fact, it's double the amount that Stick plushie gives, especially for the fact how its drawback, aka making you 2% slower, is barely even a drawback. And secondly, it's stackable. So if you really wanted to, you could hypothetically put 2 Partridge plushies on and have 40% more stamina, which is actually pretty crazy to think about. Not saying I think of plushies all the time, because I have better things to do in my life other than making a tier list of 84 separate plushies. Wink wink. In 19th, we have Chick Plushie. In terms of creating speed builds, this is the go-to plushie that everyone uses. And it's obvious why. Equipping one plushie gives a 5% speed boost at the cost of some weight. The biggest reason that people use this, however, is unlike most plushies which force you to meet some specific criteria, Chick Plushie is active at all times, including while flying and swimming, hence making it the most versatile and most optimal for usage. The cost, however, is what brings it down. Using 2 of these means you have 15% less weight, which in terms makes you a lot more frail than usual. Therefore, if you are using this, you need to be a lot more careful or otherwise you will die really quickly. In 18th, we have Lunar Keelan. Out of all the plushies you get from merch, this is by far the best out of all of them. Soft landing is really useful for creatures that have jump, as not only can it allow creatures to make otherwise impossible jumps, it also allows them to be a lot better at fighting flyers and gliders, especially if they have wing shredder or shock area to ground them. Overall though, I'm not sure if it's worth spending 6 figures, thanks to the merch premium, just to buy the plushie, and that's if you can even find someone selling them, as they aren't easy to find in trade realm alone. In 17th, we have Pie Chomper. Pie Chomper basically gives an extra layer of skin to the bleed ailment. It's very good for builds that revolve around that ailment in particular, and even if the creatures do not deal bleed, you can pair it with Cat Plushie to make a powerful archetype. The reduced health regen is a bit of a bummer though. 25% less health regen is quite a hefty drawback, especially if your creature doesn't heal as quick as others do, but for an ailment related build, this plushie is a very solid choice for anybody. In 16th, we have Bear Plushie. Despite the very low usage of it, it's actually really overlooked for how powerful it is. When equipped, instead of aggro giving you 25% extra damage, it gives 37.5%. If you do the math, this means that Bear Plushie on its own gives an extra 12.5% damage, as long as you are aggroed, and even decreases the stam regen debuff by 5%, and vice versa for Carrowing. Those stats equate to the same amount of damage given by a Void and Ice Wolf combined. The only downside to this is you do have to aggro in order to have it active, whereas with Void or Ice Wolf, it's automatically active. Personally, I think this plushie would definitely be better for people who face tank, as they almost are always aggroed in fights. On the other hand, unless you literally aggro before every fight, you won't likely get as much value from it, as you need to be the guy to attack first unless you pre-aggroed beforehand. In 15th, we have Tannenbaum. Out of all the plushies that give offensive ailments, this unfortunately is the most underwhelming of them all. One of the main reasons of this is that you need to stack a lot of Frostbite on someone in order for it to give value. However, if you do manage to pull it off, it's always worth it. Tannenbaum can be really good when comboed with the Sticky Fur ability, which both increase bite cooldown incrementally. Or if you have a perk that disorientates like Shock Area or Dazzling Flash, you can also use them to get Frostbite down much easier. In 14th at the top of B tier, we have Cow Plushie. On tier 5 aquatics like Arachu and Magnesetus, it's amazing. Having more weight allows you to win not only fights more often against mirrors, but also be able to grab more creatures within your weight range. It's also pretty good for other tanks too, like Golgoroth, as it has access to Hunker, which allows it to sustain a lot better against multiple people, especially with the extra weight for more health and damage. One of the downsides, however, is it does reduce damage by 5%, so although it might be good on a high weight creature like Bengun, yes, as a tier 2, it has 3k weight, which is more than some tier 3s and 4s, but for creatures like Korra and Hygos who do huge damage, it's better to run Void or Ice Wolf, as you want to deal as much damage as possible in order to win against harder matchups. In 13th, 12th, 11th, 10th, and 9th, we have all 5 of a limited event Mini Mite plushies. Now for starters, having the ability to double jump is already really powerful, but to have it with a buff as well with no drawbacks is absolutely crazy. Personally, out of the 5, I believe that Dolt and Mo are the best out of a bunch. Dolt being for the fact you can be more aggressive and have more punishing plays with it, and Mo purely because it's also a mini Ice Wolf too. Regardless, however, all of these plushies have decent buffs, so whichever one you decide is better is purely just based on preference. If you're playing an ambusher that goes for quick kills like Hybok or Kurogosk, Mo and Dolt would be a better pick. However, if you're a person who likes to stack ailments, Rod might be better for you to reset much quicker. In 8th place, we have Heart Plushie. I cannot stress how good this plushie is for creating tank builds. You need a creature to be able to out-heal most tier 3s, use Heart Plushie. Need a DoorDash delivered to you because you can't be asked to cook, or you can't cook at all? Use Heart Plushie. Need someone who can help solve all your life problems? No pun intended. Heart Plushie. Seriously though, 30% more health regen is insane, and more than likely it can easily be in S tier. However, the next plushies are just, well, better. Still, Heart Plushie is an amazing plushie, and you could probably argue there is at least top 5 plushies in game. In 7th place, and this is controversial, we have Cat Plushie. Now I will obviously get some backlash for this, as literally everyone and their mother uses this plushie, and it is obvious why. Firstly, bleed is one of the best ailments in the game. For starters, being able to just instantly disable healing is huge, and it's one of the main reasons that people lose fights. However, the only reason that this isn't number 1 is that a lot of creatures resist bleed, around 85% as an estimate, and also Azure Quetzal, although not used as much anymore, is basically a straight counter to it. Whereas Poison and Burn both have a fraction of that respectively. However, like Heart Plushie, Cat is by no means a bad plushie. It's a staple for ankle biters, and yet it's actually pretty cheap to afford too. Nonetheless, Cat Plushie sits respectively in the top of A tier. In 6th place, barely missing out of S tier, we have Void Plushie. And yes, once again, this is going to make people pretty upset with me, but hear me out. Void Plushie is good, sure. That 7.5% damage boost will come in handy in 95% of the fights you get in. However, for me, it just doesn't hit. I don't know what it is, but that 2.5% slower speed weirdly feels a lot slower than usual. Still, regardless, 7.5% is a huge amount for a creature that has a base damage of 300. A 7.5% boost will make that 322, and having 2 or a 15% boost of that would make that 345, which may not sound like a lot, but putting into other factors like aggro and weight, it can easily snowball a potentially losing fight into a winning position. It doesn't deserve the title of the best plushie in the game in my opinion, however, because of its consistent value it gives to creatures, it definitely deserves its spot in the top 5 plushies overall. Coming up in 5th, we have Horned Beetlefly. I cannot stress enough how many times this plushie has saved me in otherwise certain death scenarios. Having the cost of flying halved not only is really good for getting out of sticky situations, but also extremely resource efficient. So if you are in a fight mid-air, you're almost always going to have more stam, which therefore means you can run for longer, hence increasing your chances of catching up or escaping from someone. This plushie is always a first pick for me whenever I'm choosing plushies for a flyer, especially with Silver Scroll, as it gives it some room for its non-existent mobility. I may be biased as this is one of my favourite plushies in the game, but genuinely, if you are learning to pick up flyers or wanting to KOS as one, Horned Beetlefly is a fantastic pick for literally anything with wings. In 4th place, we have Ice Wolf, and hot take, but I think this plushie is actually better than Void. Instead of getting the regular 7.5% with Void, with a 2.5% decrease to speed, Ice Wolf gives you 5% for basically free. This in general makes it universally more versatile with all creatures when compared with Void. At least, that's my opinion. Do you think that Ice Wolf or Void is better? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. But regardless, Ice Wolf, like Void, can also be stacked. So therefore you could hypothetically choose to combine different combos like double Ice Wolf or one Ice Wolf and a Mo plushie. But seriously, when it comes to making builds, Ice Wolf and Void is like your bread and butter for making your creatures deal crazy damage. However, in terms of applying to everyone, Ice Wolf is the more consistent and superior plushie. In 3rd place, we have Pink Lantern, easily one of the best plushies in the game. Being able to reduce stam regen while also disable healing is valuable, and unlike Cat plushie, which deals bleed, burn is resisted by a third of the creatures in total, compared to bleed, which is resisted by around 85% of creatures. Therefore, Pink Lantern is a better pick for ankle biters, as compared to Cat, you have a lot less matchups where Pink Lantern's effects are nullified, and still, you can get a better effect than Cat as long as you have more than 10. And still, you can get a better effect than Cat so long as you have more than 10. And still, you can get a better effect than Cat so long as you have more than 10 stacks of burn. However, there is one plushie which I do think is slightly better. And that's this guy. Wait, never mind though. He's 2nd place though. He's close. And finally, the best plushie in-game, at the top of S tier, we have Haunt Dragon. Now V-Sprout, why is Haunt Dragon quote-unquote the best plushie in the game? Firstly, compared to other plushies that give debuffs like Cat giving less damage and Tannenbaum having a higher bite cooldown, Haunt Dragon does not give any nerfs, which is huge. And as much as poison isn't used often, it's actually one of the best ailments in the game. Not only does it deal damage over time like other ailments, but if you manage to stack enough poison, it prevents and even drains stamina, which for flyers is terrifying. As if you combo this with Wing Shredder, which is common along a lot of popular creatures, they're pretty much screwed. But anyway, what do you think is the best plushie? I'd love to hear all your comments down below. Anyway, that marks the end of our tier list. Thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you never. Peace.